What's up, everybody? Welcome to NOLA 25, a podcast where we sit down with ministry leaders across the city, hear their stories, and discuss what it looks like to do ministry in the city of New Orleans. Today, we're going to be sitting down with George Ross. He's the North American Mission Board Send Missionary to our city, and he's also a church planner here. So he's got some great ministry insight, and I'm looking forward to sitting down and chatting with him. Y'all enjoy. Hey, George, how's it going?
Going well today.
So excited to see you. So excited to have you on the show. So to get started, why don't you tell us where you're from originally and how you ended up in New Orleans?
Absolutely. I'm from North Mississippi. So I was born and raised in Olive Branch, Mississippi. Lived there most of my life. Had a window where I lived in Montana for a little bit. But that's where I'm from, and that's where I was born and raised in North Mississippi.
Gotcha. Very cool. And so how did you get from there to here?
Sure. My journey of being in a church, a vocational ministry, I was a high school teacher and I coached football. I knew God called me to ministry when I was in 11th grade, but I tried to do some other things other than that. And my first job was a job in North Mississippi as a college pastor. From there, I went to be a youth pastor. And then as a youth pastor, the church that I was at and served for 8 years was a church planting church. And that was back in the day where churches really didn't have a system or a pathway to plant churches. This church had just grown so much, they knew they didn't want to continue to build. They wanted to send out. And they wanted to plant a church about 10 miles south of them. And through that journey, I actually started working with that church in their church planting efforts. They planted a church 10 miles south. I went to help that church, not as the church planner, but I went to help them get started. And then both of those churches together actually sent me out as a church planter about 10 miles south from that town. We had actually started through our work together a little church planting network. We didn't even know it at the time. We just knew we had some like-minded churches, our two churches and some other churches that really had a heartbeat for seeing churches planted in Mississippi. And through that, through me being sent out as a church planter, I planted Life Point Church in Senatobia, Mississippi. Through that journey, we started a church planting network. So those churches in North Mississippi got together. They recognized they had a lot of like-mindedness, and we started thinking through how we could cooperate together to plant churches, and the 1-8 network was started. So the 1-8 network was something that I directed for about 2.5-3 years while I was planting Life Point Church, and through that, I got connected with the North American Mission Board. So my journey here actually came through church planting relationships, church planting network work, where we were working with NAM, and in those conversations, they had just started the Send City Initiative. So that initiative is to see 32 cities be places where we really pour in our cooperative efforts to see churches planted. Those 32 cities have a lot of density, diversity, and lostness. New Orleans was one of those, and they began to ask me if I would consider praying about coming and serving in New Orleans as the missionary. And that journey was a little bit long because my wife and I really didn't sense God leading us here in the beginning. We had told them no on several occasions that we did not think God was calling us to New Orleans, but through a lot of prayer, through a visit, the visit to New Orleans really changed everything. The associational director, his name is Jack Hunter. He sent me a handwritten card, and that handwritten card was in my mailbox. I opened it up after I had just got off the phone with one of the gentlemen that was kind of part of the steering committee, the hiring committee, and said that I didn't want to come. Jack had sent me a handwritten letter and said, if you come to New Orleans, we'll pay for your dinner. We'll put you up in a hotel for you and your wife. We just want to show you the city. So I came, and Dennis Watson, Fred Luter, and Jack just did a wonderful job of showing me the city, of communicating a passion for the city. And it was in that time that the Lord really stirred in my wife's heart and my heart that this is where we're supposed to be. So we moved here. In fact, October the 1st, I start my 8th year in New Orleans.
Wow. That's so awesome. So man, you moved from a place where you were really like settled in Mississippi, like you were in a good place. You had been a part of like this big church, but then also you were part of this network, and you're being invited to come to this, this really, I guess, a relatively new thing or brand new thing at the time. Was that a difficult experience to transition from that sort of really established or rooted position to this venturing, pioneering type position?
there's the excitement of doing it, but then there's also the reality of the difficulties in transition. I did leave a really good church. They cared for my family well. I had really good friendships and relationships. The church that I was at, I'd been there for 9 years.
Wow.
So when I resigned on a Sunday morning, the church actually wouldn't let me resign. They said, we don't let people resign around here. We send out missionaries. And awesome. That church sent me out as a missionary. And I'm just so very grateful for their kindness and love towards that. But moving, and you're moving to the unknown, you're moving to a new place, you're moving to a new context. So as much excitement as there was in the newness of it, there were certainly a lot of things, because the environment that I had been in wasn't even necessarily suburban. It was an in-between rural and suburban. It's a little window there. We weren't really rural. We weren't really suburban. We were somewhere, a small town in the middle, and New Orleans is an urban context. So there's so many things that are different than what I experienced where I was, that there certainly was some transitional time that some things were difficult.
Gotcha. So for those who may not know already, I know that you wear a couple of different hats in New Orleans. You're doing a few different things that we'll probably end up touching on throughout the interview. Talk some about the different things that you're doing in New Orleans at this point, like your different roles, I mean.
I'm the NAM City Missionary. That's my first and primary role. So I work for the North American Mission Board as a full-time missionary here to help do several things. One is I want to help mobilize churches. So part of my job is to serve the local church. Churches plant churches. So I want to serve the local church in helping them partner in New Orleans to see churches planted here. That's part of our initiative. The other part of that is shepherding. We do something called planter care. When I planted years ago, there's a lot of well-meaning things that were happening in church planting, but planter care wasn't even on the radar. There wasn't a very intentional process to make sure, okay, are the planters and families that we're sending out, are we caring for them and their health? Because when you're trying to reach lost people and you're in a harder context, there's a lot of things that go into that can be difficult for you, difficult for your family. So shepherding the planters and their families is a huge part of my job and joy, and I love that. We love having planters and families in our home, so we take that very serious. We want to shepherd and care for them very well. Planter care is very important. And the other part of that is just continue to do the missionary work that we need to have done here in New Orleans. Where is the next church plant going to be? What area do we know that there's a number of lost people there? The community, they need a church plant. Maybe a church closed its doors. So doing the missionary work of knowing the community and knowing the city and really being able to strategize to know where the next church plant's going to go. That's my NAM job and love that. I work with Send Relief, Gen Send, all those things go along with that as well. We also have a partnership with seminaries. So New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary has been a great partner for NAM. We have a partnership with them through the NAM multiplication pipeline, where students can get up to 20 hours of credit. If they're a graduate student, they can get 19 hours of credit if they're an undergrad student, and they go through the NAM multiplication pipeline. You're in L2 right now, so you have a little understanding of what that is. That multiplication pipeline is really a resource to help develop missionaries, to help develop church planters and church planting teams. So we're in partnership with the seminary in that. I do some church planting classes. I teach there for them. I'm a ministry-based faculty would be the title of that. And then lastly, I'm a replant pastor here in the city. So I work with a team of incredible elders at Lakeshore Church, and we're the replant of Pontchartrain Baptist Church, and we will celebrate our third year. We celebrated our third year. I take that back. COVID throws everything off. You know?
Yeah,
you just forget when you're living.
That's
so
right.
We'll celebrate our fourth year this coming January.
Man, so you're a busy man, pretty busy man.
I got a little going on.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the church planting aspect. Tell us a little bit about the area where you're planting.
We're in an area called Lake Vista. So Lake Vista, Lakeshore. It's all part of the Lakeview area. Not a lot of lake words there.
Yeah.
So primarily we've moved to meeting in a United Methodist church. We outgrew our building, and because of that, we had to move, and we moved to a local school. And just because of some reasons, not with us, but with the parish school system, we couldn't meet there anymore. We had to move out, and we had outgrown the building we were in, which we do still own, but we use it for a Spanish church, and we use it for our youth and meetings and other things that we do. We're in the Lake Vista United Methodist Church. They are gracious and let us meet there on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. So we meet there and have service. The Lake Vista community, it's a community there in the Lakeshore, Lakeview area. a lot of older Catholics that are there. So you're going to have more affluence there. You know, it's one of the areas of New Orleans where there's a lot of affluence. There's a lot of people that have, a higher income than they would have in other areas of the city. It is predominantly an Anglo community. There's not a lot of, diversity, although there is some diversity there. But when you're looking at diversity on a large scale like New Orleans, it's nothing like the diversity you see all over the city. So maybe the Spanish community that is in Bucktown, which is right next to the Lakeshore community, it's right across the 17th Street Canal. So we do have some different diversity there. That's one of the reasons we planted our Spanish church. But right now, Lake Vista is a community we're trying to reach, and it's a lot of generational religious people that live there, and that's who we're trying to reach in that community.
Okay. That's really interesting, George. So tell me, in your mind, what has been the biggest shift from leading a church in North Mississippi to leading a church in New Orleans, in the area that you're in?
The different context. So where I was in the Bible Belt, the buckle of the Bible Belt, most of the people looked like me, voted like me, had the same way they looked at life as I did. Not that there wasn't different groups of people, different ethnicities in that area, but for the most part where I was, that was very similar. So you can almost get in an echo chamber a little bit because everybody around you believes the same way, thinks the same way. That was, and I don't, look at that as a bad experience. That's just how it was.
Right.
Then you move to an urban context, and it's hard to be a majority of anything in an urban context. So there's so many different people. There's so much diversity. There's so many different ways that you view life and that you look at life. So that transition of understanding that, I think for me, there was a challenge, and it was a good challenge, that I really had to go back and learn what it meant to be a missionary. Mm-hmm. So a missionary is going to exegete his community and exegete the culture that you're in.
Yeah.
And transitioning to New Orleans really was a great challenge for me to begin to practice some of those things that I knew, but you kind of get complacent a little bit when you're in that environment that seems to be so very similar to you. And to challenge me to grow in what I believe, grow in what does it mean to communicate what I believe to different people that have such different worldviews, such different experiences, and all those things that come to play in that.
Yeah, you mentioned challenge a few different times. I want to kind of lean into that idea of challenge. Has there ever been a time since you've been here, or maybe a few times, where like you've almost like wanted to leave the city, or it's been so hard? And then if so, how did God keep you here in the midst of that?
There was a specific time that my wife and I we were intentionally looking for other jobs. So we'd been here for about a year and a half. I left a great community. I left a great church. I left an area where many people would seek me out for wisdom, for leadership. I was influencing a church planting network. I was influencing a lot of young church planters. So there was just a lot of influence that I had in that specific area and in that season of my life. Well, I moved to New Orleans. Well, I'm from Mississippi. And even when I got here, I remember someone saying, well, why are we hiring this guy from Mississippi? He can't do this in New Orleans. I remember that. And that person's been very kind to me since then. But their thought was that what I was doing there couldn't translate to New Orleans. And there's a history of people moving to New Orleans. And because the context is different and it is difficult in many ways, they leave. So there's a concern about that. That first year and a half, there was this transition period of where you're earning the right to be heard. And not only are you earning the right to be heard, you're learning you're learning something new. So with all that going on, I think I got discouraged, and I think I felt like that nobody needed me. There's a lot of things going on during that time. I wasn't pastoring; I was sitting in church.
Yeah.
So what was really happening was the Lord was sanctifying me.
Wow.
And helping me learn, helping me grow. Identifying some things in my life that I really needed to work on. And that was really the first time in my ministry journey that I'd had a moment, a window for that to happen. So when we were actually putting our resume, I was putting my resume out and nobody would even give me a look. I'm reading, I'm in my quiet time. And I think what's so helpful and a reminder, it's so very simple. We ought to know this. You ought to be in the Word. And I'm reading through your reading plan, Old and New Testament. In that particular day, I'm in Jeremiah 29, And Jeremiah 29 is the prophet Jeremiah speaking to the exiles in Babylon. And God starts out that letter telling the exiles who are in Babylon, they don't want to be there. They're ready to come home. The first thing that the Lord speaks through the prophet Jeremiah is, I sent you there. So the word of the Lord to me was, I sent you there, suck it up and get busy. And my wife and I both repented of our despair and our bad attitudes, and because we knew God called us here. And we got with it. And that was, our first year and a half. And October 1st, I'll start my 8th year here. Man, God's been gracious.
That's so awesome. And we're so glad God kept you here. I'm so glad. I'm thankful for you. Different direction. Give me your top 3 restaurants in the city.
Top 3 restaurants. I get that question so much that I've started to break it down different because everybody's got different ways they view. So I break it down into high end, where a New Orleanian would go eat, and then something international. That's what I've started doing. Maybe I can speak to everybody's wants and needs. High end, I love Galatories. So high end restaurant, I like Galatories. My wife and I will go there on special occasions. The steak restaurant in the corner. If I'm just thinking through, what's a place I can take somebody that's not from New Orleans that's never going to disappoint? Because sometimes a restaurant may have a great reputation, they may disappoint.
Right.
New Orleans food and spirits. They never disappoint. They got great Louisiana food. They don't disappoint. And that's where locals go eat in Bucktown.
Have you had the crawfish, voodoo crawfish rolls from there?
They're terrible for you, but they taste great.
It's ridiculous how good they are.
My international that I would say, if you got an international flair, I love Thai food. Okay. So I love Suko Thai. Suko Thai's got 2 places here in New Orleans, and they have great Thai food, and I like it.
Man, awesome. There are 2 of those places I haven't tried. One I've tried perhaps too many times. So thank you for that. Okay. Back into church planting, and to a degree, this is more aimed at your NAM role. In your opinion, you've been here for 8 years. What are the 3 most important qualities of a church planter who comes to New Orleans?
Yes, 3. I'll start with C. Calling. Got to be called. You've got to fall back on that. When I was really struggling with being here and thinking through leaving, one of the things that kept coming back was calling. My wife and I knew God called us here. We just knew it. There was just a great sense of understanding that we knew that the events in our life had led us to the moment of knowing God had called us here to New Orleans, and he hadn't said go anywhere else. Yeah. So calling, you've got to have that because ministry is difficult, and there's going to be times where you're going to want to give up. Well, if the Lord called you there, it's just like the Lord told the exiles in Babylon, I sent you there. If he sent you there, stay there until he says move. Mm-hmm. Character is the number 2. What type of character do you have? Do you have the character of a Christian, a character of somebody that is filled with the Spirit, walking with God, Christ-likeness? Do you have deep character? Because you're going to be put in what I would say as a crucible when you're in church planting. There's spiritual warfare. There's strains on your family and marriage. There's expectations. All of those things come into play, and they can make church planting very pressure-filled. And when we are in a pressure-filled environment, sometimes we don't take care of the cracks in our character, and we end up in a place that we don't want to be. So cultivating your character, to address your character, to grow in your character is so very important. And then competency. Do you have the skill? Are you someone who shares the gospel? Have you had a history of being a disciple who makes disciples? One of the questions I'll ask somebody interested in New Orleans, well, tell me who you've been discipling and tell me, who they're discipling. Yeah. And sadly, there's many times where people can't quickly tell me who they're discipling and how they're discipling others. Yeah. So there's a red flag there. Why do you want to come plant a church in New Orleans if you haven't had a history and pattern of evangelism and discipleship in your life? Yeah. So.
Yeah, those are awesome. So if there's someone listening to this podcast or watching this podcast online and they've been praying, thinking about planning a church, and they are thinking through those 3 C's and they're like, okay, I'm not perfect, but I think I'm ready to take some next steps. How would you direct that person?
I think an in-person visit is always the way to start. Okay. That in-person visit, you're here. There's things you can see and experience being on location that you just will never see and experience if you're not here. Mm-hmm. So to come to visit, and not just come for a day, take that window of 3 to 4 days and really immerse yourself in the city. That would be one. Go to the NAM website. So if you go to the NAM website and go to Send New Orleans, there's always a way that you can click, I want to know more about church planting. So take that next click. Find out more about church planting. Somebody will reach out to you. Somebody will share with you. And I think those are the beginning stages of doing that, because that's where people will begin to ask you the questions about your calling, your character, your competency. Yeah. And one of the things that we know is that, the church that you're at right now should be the ones that's affirming you that God has called you to do this, or God is sending you to do this. You've got the character and you've got the competency. So if somebody's interested in doing that, certainly reach out to the Send Missionary, go to the North American Mission Board website, come visit the city. Those are all starting points, I think, that are very helpful in working through God's work in your life if you are called to plant a church in New Orleans.
That's good info, George. Thanks for that. Final question. If you could go back in time and encounter yourself when you were first coming to New Orleans and give yourself a piece of advice, what advice would you give yourself?
Be very teachable, be a learner, be patient. I'm an activist by nature, so I want to do. And looking back, one of the things that I wish I had done, I wish I'd have been more patient and been slower. And I did come and learn. I did come and I was teachable, but there's just so much of that when you're the new person. There's so much of that needs to happen when you're a missionary, and we don't need to believe that we've got to produce all these things so quickly in order to, be validated. And I think a lot of that was going on in my life because it was a new job. Yeah. I wish I'd had been more patient.
Amen. That's a good word, George. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're so thankful for the way that you lead Send Network here in New Orleans, and for your efforts as a church planner as well. Appreciate you and thankful for you coming on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thank y'all so much for joining us for NOLA 25. If you want to find out more information about George Ross, you can go to his website, georgeross.net. That's GeorgeRoss.net. You can find his blog there. You can also find his social media contact info. We want to thank a few different people for making this podcast possible. Firstly, the New Orleans Baptist Association, who allows us to use this space. We also want to thank Lakeshore for providing us with this equipment. And finally, we want to thank Abby Guidry, our production assistant. Thank y'all so much for watching.